All right, so again, we left off last time somewhere around page 50. But my guess is that everybody in here knows what things like variables are. All right, so the stuff that we didn't go over last time, I'm just going to very quickly run over it and think that you would have already taken a look at it. You may or may not have noticed this if you did this. When you want to print out a value inside of basically a string, the way that you do this in Swift is you put a backslash, and then whatever you want to print out, you put in parentheses. Okay? And if you say, well, why'd they do it like that? I don't know, but that's the way they did it. All right, so if you do want to print out the value of something right inside of a string, that's how you do it. So just remember to do that, okay? If it doesn't understand what you're trying to do, of course, you'll get some kind of an error message. I'm just going to back up a real little bit here. So again, we were told to go in here last time, and I said the objects, data, and methods. You've heard that shtick many times. The first-year people heard it again the other day for the second time. All right, I talked to them about it earlier, and I talked to them about it again. They're going to hear about it again next week, and they'll hear about it next semester when we talk Java. All right? And we did look at this last time where I showed you the picture that the author has here of what's going on, and maybe my explanation wasn't that great. All right, he shows another example here of somebody going to a party. It's kind of a dumb example, but it gets the idea across. All right, so this is what I had you do toward the end of class last time. Okay, I've got my interface built. The hope is that you do also. If for some reason you did not, you weren't here or whatever, you can again go out to the P drive, and I don't know now which one it is. I'll have to check and make sure I've saved the right one out there. But if I didn't, I'll go back and resave it. All right? But this is what your interface should look like. Of course, it won't be in red like this. The author did this just so it would stand out and you could see what was what. So again, I already showed you, but that's my picture of the interface right there. It's pretty similar to what you see in the book then. All right. Oops. Couple of the things that the author mentioned. I said this last time, but I want to say it again to make sure that you hear it. That on the interface, when I first created my interface, this button that you see right here, that button, looked like a regular button. In other words, this button here looked just like this. Okay, it didn't look any different. It might not have had the same text, but it looked the same way. But what I did then was I highlighted the button, however you want to highlight it to make sure it was active, went over there to the attributes inspector and made sure that the type of it was set to info light, and that changed it to this. So again, if you weren't able to do that or you had questions about how to do that, what exactly was being done there, that was on page 46 in the book. Next, we were supposed to go to the slider. And when you went to the slider, if you take a look here up on the screen, you're supposed to set the minimum value to 1 and the maximum value to 100. Sliders, in many ways, what a slider is it's kind of like a random number when you think about it. All right? And like a random number, by default, the way that sliders are set up, you may have noticed this if you looked at the slider. The minimum value was 0 and the maximum was 1. That's what it is by default. All right, because like I said, like a random number generator, it's really designed to work more with doubles or floats or whatever you want to call them. But they told us here to change that to 1, 100, and then set the current value to 50, so it would be right in the middle. All right? So again, that stuff is in the book on page 46. So the author mentions on the bottom of the page, when you're done, you should have 12 total controls on your screen. 1 slider, 3 buttons, and basically about 8 labels. All right? And there might be 1 or 2 other things that are not labels, but you get the idea. All right. So the author says if you run the app, you can, but it won't do much.
okay? Because we haven't put any functionality in it yet. It says except for the button that should pop up the alert that we created earlier. But you can drag your slider around. All right. So, as the author says, that means that we can grab a few more things that were on that initial to-do list, and we can mark them off, even though we haven't done any programming yet. Then he talks about the slider. Now, I didn't do this, but I want you to, if you get the time, you should. It says for the slider, the next item is read the value in the slider after the user presses the hit me button. So the idea is, if you click that hit me button right now, what it basically does is it says, welcome to my app, or whatever the heck it is. But they want to change it so it says the slider value, if you're right in the middle, is 50. If you move it up, the slider value is 58, etc. That's what they want to have you do in here. All right? So the author says the steps for adding this action, and he starts mentioning it on the bottom of the page here. It says, first go to viewcontroller.swift and add this. All right? Why am I taking the time to tell you this? Because I want you to remember. Remember this. There's two ways of doing this. The author says, go in, type in all that stuff, then go back to your button, or to your slider rather, hold down on the touchpad, hold down on the control key, and drag to there to set up the connection. But remember, we also talked about that if you want the system to set that up for you, you don't type in anything. You just go right to your slider, hold down on the touchpad, hold down on control, and drag out into your code window. All right? Then it asks you, and then you have to put in. It'll already have IB action in there for you. You'll put in slider mode. So it depends on which way you want to do it. But you know now that there's two ways that you can set that stuff up. And there's more than that. But those are the two ways that are probably that it's done most often. So think about what this does now. This says every time you move the slider, you should print out the value of the slider is now, and it should have the value. Does that make sense? What print does by default is on your screen, so if this square that I'm drawing on the board, if that's your screen, down in the bottom part of the screen, so down here, I don't know if it takes up the whole thing or maybe that much, that part right there, that's your console. When you do a print statement, it prints into your console area. So remember that one of the buttons that you have turns the console on and off, so if you don't see it, the console might not be showing. All right? But he gives an example, and he says, now when you do that, and you come in and you start moving the slider around and you keep hitting hit me, what's going to end up happening is that's going to get filled real fast. And you'll have a whole bunch of stuff in it. All right? All right, then he talks about strings. I already mentioned that, about putting the backslash before the name of the variable you want to print, putting the variable itself in parentheses, so we don't have to go through that again. You know more about strings than probably most people who are reading this book know. A couple things that he mentions here. Strings in this language. Strings in this language have to be in double quotes. You'll know because it turns red. Don't use single quotes. I know you can do that in other languages. You can do one or the other, like PHP, and you know that, and in JavaScript, and you know that, but not in this language. Actually, single quotes are just for a single character. All right? All right, next he talks a little bit on page 50 about variables. I don't think we have to talk about variables anymore because we've talked about variables. Now, if you haven't done this already, what you are supposed to do is at the top of your program. So please look if you have not gotten this far yet. At the very top of your program, you've got import UIKit, you've got class view controller, colon, UI view controller, which means this class, the one we're creating, view controller, extends or is a child of the UI view controller class. They want you to add that variable right there. So if you haven't done that yet, you should. All right? And my hope is you already have. Well, what is that doing? It's a var, meaning its value is going to change and possibly change often. We're also saying that it's an integer. Now, by default, if we just said var current value equals 0,
that should work also. We talked about this before. That should default it to a regular int, but for whatever reason, the author puts it in there as a regular int. By putting this in at the top of the program, outside of any one of the methods that we have, or funcs, whatever you want to call them, it's now available program-wide. That should make sense to everybody in here. It's global to the program. It's not a global variable, but it's global to the program.
As he says, it's customary to add the variables above the methods and to indent everything a little bit. By and large, as far as I can recall, most of you in here do a pretty good job of indentation. Some better than others, okay? But again, you all should know by now that when you indent, it doesn't help the program any. You could actually make a case to say it makes the program worse because you're adding white space into the program, which isn't necessary. But it improves readability a lot. All right. Whoa. Oh, I did that, but I did. Yeah, he does his thing with variables and the data that they hold. That's all fine and dandy. All right. So now what he wants you to do, again, if you have not done this, is he wants you to come back into that slider move method, because previously it just had a print statement in it. And that print statement just said the slider is now at location whatever. All right. But he wants you to change it to this. Current value, you couldn't do that before because current value is the variable we just created. So you should put inside of your slider removed function, current value equals L round F slider.value. All right, as it says, remove the print statement and replace it with that one. Okay, I don't remember if I've done that yet or not, so I'm going to take a quick look. So let's see, there's my var statement at the top of the program up there in line 12. And then in the slider move, there it is. Move this down a bit. Well, I'll put some blank lines in here so you can see it. So that's the line right there. All right. And I'm going to tell you something. You may not care, and you may totally disagree with me. Either way, it's fine. But notice what I've done is I kept the old thing that was in there. I kept it in there, and I just commented it out. So what I've been really doing a lot more of lately is if I'm building something piecemeal, I take the stuff that was in there to begin with, and I just comment it out. Now, if I was going to do this for an actual application, of course, I'd remove that sooner or later. But it's nice because I can always go back and kind of reverse engineer or go backwards in what I've been doing and take a look at it if I want to or need to. And then he explains on the top of the next page here, so we're on page 53, it looks like. But the author mentions here on page 53 that it says what's going on here, and he explains what's needed, how it's used, etc. All right? Probably much better than I could do it. It says, what about that L round F thing? Right down here, about halfway down on the page. So let me move this up a little bit. It says, recall that the slider's value can have numbers behind the decimal point. We don't care about that. We actually don't want a number that's generated that's a non-integer, okay? You should understand that totally. If I said to you, how many numbers exist between 0 and 1? There's an infinite number. So if I had to create a random number between 0 and 1, there's a chance I might guess forever and never guess it. All right? So that's what he gets into here. It says it's more fair to use whole numbers or integers only. So it says you use the L round to round the decimal to the nearest whole number. Okay? Then he talks about functions and methods. We've already talked about those. Again, this is interesting because this language is totally object-oriented, yet the word that they decided to use was func. All right? In other words, meaning function. I suppose you could say, well, it's a method. They probably didn't want to use meth because that really doesn't have a real good connotation either to it when people hear the word meth. All right. So then he comes in on the top of the next page, on the top of page 54 here, and he says, I want you to now go in and change your show alert so that it looks like this. If you have not done that yet, please do that now and add the stuff that's on into show alert that's shown on page 54. I don't know if I have that on mine or not. I don't remember, so I'm going to quick look. Let message equal, I've got that. Let alert equal. Looks like I've got it all in there, okay? All right, so as it says, the highlighted parts there are the parts that you change. Okay, so the idea is now when we run this and we hit the hit me button, all right, we should get a value that comes out. So let's save this. I'll try to run it, and I'll see if mine is up to date. It took longer than I wanted it to take, but I wanted you to at least see that. I gave you time last period to go over and make those changes yourselves. You may have done that. You may not have done that. I don't know. We're going to get to a point in this thing, and I don't remember where it is, but we're going to get to a certain point where we're going to have the program done. The functionality will work. You'll be able to play games. You'll be able to do everything. Everybody cool with that? And we'll get to that next week. I have no doubt we will. So we'll have all of that done. Then what he does for the last several pages of this chapter of the handout that I gave you is he says, let's pretty it up. When we get to that point, I'm going to do what I did the other day. In other words, I'm going to stop talking and just do the stuff that he shows in the book, and I'll keep taping it. So there'll be somewhere between 3 and 5 iterations of this when we get all done. They'll all be out there on the system. All right? Yeah, John, I think I told you too that mine, since I've loaded this new version up, I can't believe how long this emulator takes. And it's not like it's the first time, but it takes so long. My guess is I just have a lot of junk on this machine.
Well, mine's slower now than it used to be too, I think. It's not quite that slow.
Yeah. No, I mean, the other day it took almost 15 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's why I told you that was the first time. And that was actually the first time I let it go that long without stopping it first. And if I stop it, I get some kind of an internal server error that it comes up and tells me about. So I don't know. I'll leave it. I'm just going to minimize it for right now. Go back to here. All right. So the idea is when you go and run it, it should do something like this. So right now, if you look up on the screen here, where we should be is when you slide the slider around and you let it stop someplace and you click the hit me button, it should say hello world and it should tell you the current value of the slider. That's where you should be. All right? All right. And that's all fine and dandy, but if we go up to the next page, in fact, the author even says, cool. You've done what you wanted to do, etc. However, page 55, your first bug. And the author mentions that the way that the program is currently written, there is a bug in it. All right? He says, maybe you noticed it already. Here's how to reproduce it. It says, press the stop button in Xcode to terminate the app. Press run again. Don't move the slider and press hit me. And if you do that, even though the slider's at 50, because that's where we put it by default, right? Okay? All we did was we set a property setting. We didn't set a code setting. Correct? Remember when we did that var statement? We said var current value int equals 0. So if you start a brand new game and you click hit me without doing anything, even though the slider is at number 50, it'll register saying it's 0. So what the author does is he says, go back to your code. So go back to right here, and at the top, where we created that variable right here, and we set it equal to 0, the author says, don't do that. Set it equal to 50. Give
current value and initial value. And again, if you look up on the screen, if you don't get that, what the author says, that's where it is. But that's only a slider setting right there. That's just a property setting. So the author says if you run the program brand new, and the first thing you do is you click hit me, you would think it would say 50, but it doesn't. Because all it's saying is give me the current value of this. And if the current value of this is 0, which is what you set it to originally, even though the slider's at 50, it'll come out and say that the current value of the slider is 0. That's an error. That's a logic error. The program still works fine, but there is an error in the logic. By setting it to this, if you do that, save it, run the program again, start the program up and click hit me right away, it'll say the value is 50. That's what you want to have happen. All right?
Don't know if this is up and running yet. There. So I'm going to click hit me right now. And I haven't done anything yet. Notice the value of the slider is 0. That's an error. Would you agree? When you take a look at it? All right, because the slider was right in the middle. All right, so if I come in here now and I quit the simulator and I go back to my program, even though I've told you this before, I like to save. Even though that when you run the program, Xcode says it automatically saves for you, and I believe them, right? But just in case, I do it anyway. But now when we run it again, now when it first starts up, when I click it without moving the slider, it should say the slider, the value is equal to 50. And again, it'll come up sooner or later. All right. So now click hit me. Now this value of the slider is 50. So we have fixed that particular bug. I should come in and try it a couple more times. Move it over here a ways so it looks like it should be around 75. Well, it's more than that. Move it down to here so it should be somewhere around 25. And you can see. So it's now working. All right, that's good. That's what I wanted to have happen. All right, again, the interface is nothing to write home about. In fact, it's terrible. It's very hard right now with the white background and the white dot on the slider to even see what's going on. But we'll fix that as we go on. All right, so we fixed the bug, and that gets us to page 55. On the bottom of the page, it says kind of enough goofing around. Let's go in there and start talking about how to actually create the game. All right, so that's what we're going to do right now. It says you built the interface and you know how to find the position of the slider. That's actually, when you think about it, that's a lot of what we had to do. All right, so really when you look at it, how much code did we put in here so far? Somebody tell me. We put in one line where we declared a variable and initialized it, correct? We did our slider moved method, which had maybe a total width of curly braces of like 3 or 4 lines in it. And we put in our alert, which has maybe 10 lines in it. So we now have a game. Granted, it's ugly. Granted, it's not fully functional, but it does work with about 10 or 15 lines of code. So the author says the big remaining items are to generate a random number for the target and to calculate how the player did. But first it says there is an improvement that we can make on the slider. As I turn here up to page 56. All right. Again, I don't want to read to you. So the author says, though, you can still make the slider a little bit bigger, a little bit better than it is, okay? It says what we can do is we can look in our viewDidLoad function. If we look in our viewDidLoad function, that's it. We didn't write any code in there. Does everybody agree with that? We wrote no code in the viewDidLoad function. All right, there was that called a super in there, but we didn't write any code. Why? Because we didn't have to. But what the author says is we really should. We should take that same line that we did inside of slider moved, and we should copy it down there. Without looking at this, why should we do that?
The program worked fine without it, didn't it? All right. But what we're doing is we're letting the system know when you even first start the game, we're working with whole numbers. That's basically what we're doing with this, is we're saying right from the get-go, if for some reason, even though the number is going to show up as 50, we're just letting the system know we're working with integers. So I'm going to take that particular value,
that line of code, that current value, and just copy it. I don't like to copy from the PDF here. It might have junk in it. So I'm just going to go up to here and find where I've got that value, which is in my slider moved. I'm going to grab it, highlight it, do a Command C for copy, go over to my view did load, Command V, oops, so I grabbed the wrong one, and paste it in. There you go. All right. And hopefully I didn't give you much of an explanation, but that's what the author says on the bottom of page 56. It says, unfortunately, Xcode complains about these changes when you press run. Try it yourself. And it should come back and say build failed. And, you know, Luke, you said before the other day how you really liked the way that the author is very deliberate. Yeah. This is what he's doing here. Yeah. He purposely had you introduce something which should introduce another bug into the program. But unlike the last bug, which was a logic error, all right, this is more or less a syntax error. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it. Build failed. All right. If you've never had that happen before, well then congratulations on having it happen now. I will guarantee you that next semester you will have many more build fails than you did build succeeded. All right? Until you get to a certain point in your program, then it'll succeed because you'll just be tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it. All right. So the author says it'll say something like error use of unresolved identifier slider. Okay? And it says that happens because viewDidLoad doesn't know about that slider yet. All right? Because we haven't loaded, what viewDidLoad did is it's basically going to be loading everything into memory. All right? So it says, okay, how do you do the exact same thing? So how do you do what it is you have to do? Well, it worked later on in the program because we've got the parameter in there that said what slider was. But we don't have that parameter in here right now. So the author's idea behind this was he wanted to let you know that you're working with a variable that hasn't been created yet. So you have a scope issue. All right? So it says slider is local, so you really can't use it anyplace else. All right? So on the bottom of page 57 and going on to page 58, and this is a really long explanation if you haven't seen it before, but he starts talking about variables, and he mentions there's three types. There's global, that exists for the duration of the app and are accessible anywhere. You already know one of those. That's the one you created at the top of your program. There's an instance variable, all right, things like current value that live as long as the object lives, and there's local variables that are declared inside of a routine itself. All right. So for instance, this should make sense to all of you. Message, alert, and actions. Since they're declared inside of showAlert, they're only available inside of showAlert unless we call another function and pass them. You all know how to pass variables. You've done it in multiple languages. All right. It's no different here. So on page 57 and then going on to most of page 58, all right, on going on to most of page 58, he explains all that stuff. So he says, well, how do we fix this? And the way that you fix it, if you look up on the screen here, if you have not done it yet, is you go back up to the top of the page and right either before or after, it doesn't matter, where you've got the var current value, what you do is you put in there add IB outlet. Oops, not there, sorry. at IB outlet weak var slider colon UI slider exclamation point. Okay? Now, a couple things about this. First of all, I'm asking you this question. Did we have to do it like that? That's the first time we manually went and keyed one of those in, correct? In the past, we've always taken the slider and dragged it over here and let the system build it for us ourselves. I think, to me, that's a better way of doing it. That's syncing everything up, and it's doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that line that I just put in, and I'm going to remove it. All right? And then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to click on the slider, hold down on my control key and on the touchpad, and I'm going to drag over to here, let go, and outlet. All right, the name is slider, and it's weak, and it's of type UI slider, and I'm going to click connect. Now the system created that for me. I like doing it better that way, but it should look 100% the same as whether we key it in manually or do it that way. All right? So they mention on the top of page 59, it really doesn't matter where you put that, whether you put it above the var or below the var, just as long as it says you put it in there someplace. They explain what it does, but we've already talked about the fact that we're saying that is an interface builder outlet variable. Weak, again, means that, that we're going to let the system take care of how that it's allocated and deallocated, and the exclamation point means it may or may not be set. All right, so that's what all of the stuff that's in there means. So, okay, then they show you the other way of doing it, the way that we just kind of looked at, okay? So it says this is the outlet you just added to the slider. You want to successfully connect the slider object from the storyboard to the view controller slider object, okay? So we've already looked at, I think we've already done this earlier, all right? So that's page 59. Let's jump over to 60. We'll talk about creating the random number, and then we'll take a break. It's getting to be that time. All right. It says, with these changes in place, it doesn't matter what you choose for an initial value of the slider. When the app starts, the current value will always be correct. That's good. All right. But it's important that you understand that. This variable right here, this, IB outlet, what you see right there on the screen where I put my finger over back and forth, that says this. That's what it is. This variable right here, the one with var, is a variable. We are telling the system to look at the actual value that's in here and show us that value. But remember, technically, that value that's in there, all right, even though it's showing us as a number, technically it's a string, right? Because that's basically everything, and that's why we're using the L round and the F and everything else. So we're doing the conversion. Hopefully all that stuff makes sense. All right. Then they talk about comments. I think you all know comments already. So again, / for a single line comment, /*, ending with a * for a multiple line comment on page 60. And it's a little early. Let's take our break now. We'll come back at 5 after, and we'll get through the generating the random number, and we'll start to get into adding the rounds to the program. All right? And hopefully you noticed, I just rebuilt mine. It's going to now say that it succeeded. The error line was there, but it's gone away now that I clicked the build line.